Hi again. In the last section, you learned how important it is to keep your heart sticky if you want to have a permanent marriage bond. In this section, you are going to learn how important it is to keep your body healthy if you want to have children. Infertility, the inability to conceive and/or carry a child to term, has increased 300% over the last 30 years. Most of the increase is due to the epidemic of sexually transmitted diseases, or STDs. Prior to the sexual revolution of the 60s and 70s, there were 2 STDs. Now there are more than 25. They are epidemic among young people. 1 out of 3 Americans above the age of 12 has an incurable STD. That ought to make you gulp. That statistic doesn't even include the curable ones. STDs don't just happen to those people. They can happen to anyone who is sexually active. Take Lori, for example. She was probably a perfectly nice girl. This is her true story. As I swept the gray drapery surrounding Lori's emergency room bed behind me, I was startled by the intensity of pain I saw on her young face. Her mother said she was having abdominal discomfort, but clearly either she understated the situation or something had happened on the car ride over. This was one sick kid. I glanced at the monitor above her head and noted that her heart was racing dangerously fast. Her breathing was labored and her blood pressure was beginning to drop. If we didn't act quickly, I realized that Lori would go into shock and die. But what was wrong? The ER physician thought she had acute appendicitis. High fever, right lower quadrant pain, otherwise healthy 14-year-old girl. I'll bet she may have ruptured. He reassured me that the surgeon was on his way for emergency appendectomy. While intravenous fluids rushed into her small veins and antibiotics were pushed into the plastic tubing by the nurse, I laid my stethoscope on her chest. Her heart was racing too fast, and I didn't like her breathing pattern. I gently placed my hands on her abdomen and pressed. It felt like a piece of oak floorboard, stiff. I was sure she'd ruptured. Something inside, and we needed to act immediately. Where are those guys? She should have been in surgery half an hour ago, I barked at the emergency room nurse. Sorry, Dr. Meeker. We had to call in another surgeon. Dr. Townsend's in surgery right now with an auto accident, she told me. The next 10 minutes felt like 2 hours, but finally the other surgeon appeared and whisked Lori to the OR. As I spoke with her mother and father, trying to reassure them that she was in good hands, I worried. I knew that once an abscess ruptures in the abdomen, time is of the essence. So I changed the subject while the surgeon worked. That's all I could offer. We talked about her last basketball game, when her team played my daughter's team and beat them. We all smiled at the thought of the kids playing basketball, and I felt a warmth then that I knew they didn't feel. My daughter was home in bed. Theirs was struggling for life on a steel table upstairs. When the surgeon came out of the OR, he motioned to speak to me privately. That unnerved me, as it did her parents. How'd it go? I inquired. She's in serious danger, I have to be honest. She didn't have appendicitis, he said firmly. When I opened her up, she had an abdomen full of pus. She had a tubo-ovarian abscess which had ruptured. I had to take her right ovary, and her left one doesn't look so hot. Frankly, she'll be lucky if she pulls through, he told me. What his findings told me was that Lori had pelvic inflammatory disease, caused by either chlamydia or gonorrhea. The infection began in her cervix and climbed to her uterus, then through her fallopian tubes and out to her ovaries. It formed an abscess on her right ovary that had ruptured, spilling the infection into her abdominal cavity. This type of infection is always life-threatening. How she had gotten the infection in the first place? Whether she had had sex once, twice, 5 times, it didn't matter. When I told her parents, they were shocked and frightened. Her father's instinct was to blame her boyfriend. After all, he said, he was 16 and should have known better than to harm his young daughter. Then he became angry with me, the surgeon, himself, then Lori. Then he just broke down and sobbed. 2 days passed and Lori finally turned the corner. Her heart rate returned to normal, her blood pressure rebounded, and the antibiotics we pumped into her veins seemed to be winning the battle against chlamydia. She didn't have gonorrhea, as it turned out, and this was good. Chlamydia is stubborn enough. After a week, Lori went home from the hospital. She would live with the scar tissue surrounding her one remaining ovary and fallopian tubes for the rest of her life. It is highly unlikely that she will ever bear a child. I just read to you from a book entitled Epidemic: How Teen Sex is Killing Our Kids. Dr. Meeker, who wrote this book, is a pediatrician in Traverse City, Michigan. You are going to learn a lot about STDs in this section, probably more than you want to know, but it is very important, not just for you, but for those you will warn. I'm sorry to say that this section reads like a textbook, but hey, you are in school. And some of you might want to become doctors someday. If so, you'll need to know this if you are going to truly help your patients. You'd be surprised how many doctors do not know this information. Before you begin, take a minute to ask God to protect not only your heart and health and fertility, but the heart, health, and fertility of your future spouse. Guard your body, friend.